Good morning, councillors, officers, members of the public, and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of Teignbridge District Council's full council. So should the fire alarm sound, please leave the room by the nearest exit and meet by the stand at the far end of the car park. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and a boom microphone will be brought over to you. Please make sure you speak into the microphone, otherwise you won't be heard on the live stream. There is no need for members to stand up when they are speaking. You're free to remain seated. Please keep your points short, and I ask members not to repeat points that have already been raised. Voting will be by a show of hands. Should the meeting be adjourned, any filming must cease unless the expressed permission from those being filmed has been obtained. If there is an adjournment, I would ask that members, public and officers please leave the room until the meeting reconvenes. And finally, I'd just like to remind members that a member who has spoken on a motion may not speak again whilst it is the subject of debate, except to speak once on an amendment moved by another member, or to move a further amendment if the motion has been amended since they last spoke. So we will be trying to keep fairly strictly to one contribution per member during the debate. So moving on then, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have Councillors Cook, Dewhurst, Eden, Goodman Bradbury, Piatt, Wrigley, Orme, Jenks, Khan, Toome, Russell and Phipps.
Thank you.
And
Is it working? Yeah. Press button.
yeah, sorry, I couldn't see it in the light. And Councillor Sylvia Russell.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Petherington.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm a member of the Planning Committee, so I feel that I might need to abstain when it comes to the vote on this item. I'm a member of the Planning Committee, yes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I saw another hand. Councillor Dawes.
Hi, yes, as I think people know, I'm a member of the Conceptual CBS Community Benefit Society for the Alexandra Theatre. I've asked for dispensation to speak and vote on this matter. I've been granted dispensation to speak on the matter, and the advice I have is that that ruling is not in line with the Localism Act. Therefore, as a point of order, I'd like to ask if the same rules are being applied to other unpaid directorships of societies, and whether councillors Cook, Councillors Wrigley and Hook, with their interests of the Newton Abbot CIC, will also being asked not to vote on this matter. Thank you.
Councillor Hook, do you wish to respond to that?
It's appropriate for me to comment now. I did ask after the last meeting because in certain sympathy with Councillor Dawes, I suppose, I wanted to check that things were carried out correctly. And what I was told was that my directorship at Newton Abbot CIC is more a general organisation. It doesn't have any specific purposes or aims related to council projects in any detail. I can't recount the aims and purposes right now, but they're very general about the general welfare of Newton Abbot as a town and a community, and they have no direct bearing on any specific council projects, whereas obviously Councillor Dawes' directorship is related to a particular project which has a bearing on a current council project, and that is the difference, I'm told. Thank you.
Point of order.
Councillor Dawes.
The point of order there is the Newton Abbot CIC runs a venue in the town of Newton Abbot that is active, that is commercial, that rents out space, that is operates screening facilities that could be perceived as being in direct competition with other facilities in the town. Therefore, I'd like to know who offered that advice, because I don't think that is consistent advice and falls into the what I suggested previously, is that councillors of political persuasions are being treated differently and given advantage by the senior officers in this council.
Councillor Dawes, sorry, but just checking in the procedural rules, a member may raise a point of order at any time, but a point of order may only relate to an alleged breach of the rules of procedure or the law.
So you are in breach of the Localism Act by not allowing me to vote on the matter.
There's no breach.
May I ask the monitoring officer to respond to that, please?
Chair, there's no breach, despite what the councillor might allege or assert. There are no breaches. He has, as was discussed at the last full council and has been explained to him on a number of occasions in writing by me, he has a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of this matter that's on the agenda before council. That is why he had to declare it. That is why he had to leave the room on the last occasion. He submitted a request yesterday, albeit 5 o'clock on Friday evening, which I looked at yesterday. There were no supporting grounds put forward in support of the request. I considered his application for dispensation. I spoke to the chair of standards. We agreed that on balance he should be given a dispensation to speak today because of his background and involvement in the sector that we're discussing, and as such it would be informative potentially to members, and we considered it appropriate to grant him dispensation to speak but not to vote. The reason for not voting is because his interest is directly linked to the matter before council. His organisation, I understand, has submitted a planning application. I'm not quite sure how close or how much more of a conflict a member could have, which is why we decided he should not be allowed to speak. There are no breaches of the code. There are no breaches of the law. It is as it is. In respect of Councillor Hook, Councillor Wrigley, as they've been mentioned, their interests, the rules would apply to them in the same way as this. If their organisation to which they are directors or any other, or whether they hold any other office in respect of that organisation, if something came forward to council that directly affected that organisation, the same rules would apply to them.
Corruption. The Localism Act does not define disclosable pecuniary interest as being a non-paid a non-paid director of a charitable organisation. That is the law. You are misinterpreting the law. That is maladministration.
Chair, clearly Councillor Dawes is insistent on expressing his own opinion. I've written to him, I've explained why there are no conflicts, why the rules aren't being applied differently regardless of political persuasion. To suggest otherwise is a little bit of an insult and a bit rich. But nevertheless, the Localism Act sets out the default position which has to be included within the Code of Conduct. I've explained and appointed Councillor Dawes to the sections which allow the council to add to that, which it has chosen to do by adding non-paid directors. There are no conflicts, there are no breaches.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hockin, I think people thought I wasn't coming, but I am here. Just as a matter of clarity, really, we've had one councillor already declare an interest because he is on the planning committee. Now, if that is correct, then surely all the other 16 members of the planning committee who are here today should also declare the same interest and also not be allowed to vote. Thank you.
It's a matter for councillors.
I suggest that that's a matter for councillors and their own conscience.
It is.
It is the same for Councillor Dawes.
You don't get it. This whole thing is fixed. Clarity regarding Councillor Jackie Hook's statement she made a short while ago. Could she share with us who gave her this advice regarding her position? And also, notwithstanding that advice, whether she might want to reflect whether she will indeed vote on this matter, perhaps bearing in mind one word, integrity.
I'm not sure that Councillor Hook has that kind of interest in this, and it's not relevant.
She stated she had received advice on her position.
Councillor
Hook stated she had received advice on her position. I think it's fair to ask who advised her. Was it an officer of Teignbridge District Council, or was it someone outside this organisation? And if so, who?
I don't think Councillor Hook is under any obligation to reveal from whom she obtained advice.
Is this dragging on long? I'm happy to.
Okay.
With respect, can Councillor Hook make that decision herself?
Councillor Hook.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to say who gave that advice, but I wanted to make a comment on the planning committee issue. Obviously, there are a number of us here that are on planning committee. I don't believe there is any reason, just because you're on planning committee, that you can't vote to contribute some more money or not to a council project. The consideration of the planning components of that project are an entirely different thing, and I've separated them in my mind. And so I have concerns on both, but I've separated them out, and I feel planning committee members can make a separate decision about whether they would want to fund or not the cinema project before us.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. I think it's time to move. Oh, Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. In the matter of dispensations, it is worth noting that the dispensation can be granted in the interests of residents in the authority area. Bearing in mind that the petition that was signed regarding the Alexandra Theatre represented several thousand people, not including those who signed from outside the area, I would suspect that at the very least, Councillor Dawes should be given the opportunity to debate the matter fully on the basis that it is in the interest of residents of this authority area. This is a significant amount of spend in this authority area. Thank you.
As I understand it from the head of legal services and our monitoring officer, that is why Councillor Dawes has been given this dispensation to participate in the debate. But according to the head of legal services, there is no dispensation for Councillor Dawes to vote. Right, moving on then. We move to item 3, the main item on our agenda today, which is the recommendation for a capital budget increase on the Future High Street Fund to mitigate cost inflation related to the Newton Abbot cinema construction and fit-out. And I ask Councillor Jeffreys, the Executive Member for Economy and Jobs, to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. The report before members today seeks an additional capital budget of up to £600,000 in relation to the construction and fit-out costs for the new full-screen cinema in Newton Abbot. The cinema is a fundamental part of the plans for transformational change to Newton Abbot Town Centre. As you're aware, we have secured £5.2 million of government grant funding towards the overall project cost of £7.5 million to enable this to happen. This is a significant investment that would never happen without the Future High Street Fund. The Council is also securing a £7.5 million asset for a £2.3 million investment. While there has been significant volatility in several areas that have contributed to the rising costs and uncertainty, the proposal before you offers a solution that delivers on the Council's ambitions, secures a long-standing tenant and still provides a return on investment above 1%. We have also received the following message from Scott Cinemas ahead of today's discussion. Scott Cinemas have a long-standing interest in Newton Abbot, having operated the Alexandra for over 25 years, and believe there is a real potential in the town to have a thriving, modern new cinema as part of the wider development and investment in Market Walk and the Pannier Market. Whilst all out-of-home venues face great challenges at present, cinema going remains a much-loved activity, as demonstrated in National Cinema Day last Saturday, with over 1.4 million people attending a UK cinema on just one day. As a company, we are fully committed to operating in Newton Abbot and excited about the opportunity to deliver a new full-screen state-of-the-art venue for the town. Chairman, I now move to accept the recommendations as set out.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Do we have a seconder? You're formally seconding.
Which move an amendment? Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor.
Chairman, I think the amendment deals with process within council. It's important that the amendment is moved at the beginning. The amendment is that the council resolves to, and there are three parts, commission its external auditors, Grant Thornton or another appropriately skilled and qualified external audit provider, to review and report on the governance of the Future High Street Fund in relation to the commissioning, construction costs and contracting for the proposed new cinema, and the information provided to council to make an informed decisions. The report to be commissioned as a matter of urgency and presented to the Audit Scrutiny Committee for consideration and any further recommendations. 2, that with effect from October 2022, officers present a comprehensive written report for each executive meeting, whether it's held or not, on delivery of the Future High Street Fund and its various projects. The report will set out key objectives and timelines, progress towards them, identify when decisions will need to be made by the council or the executive, and all other necessary and relevant information about the Future High Street Fund to keep councillors fully informed. And if necessary, the report may be part 2 or an exempt item. And finally, 3, Chairman, pending receipt of the report commissioned in 1 above, council adjourns to a date to be confirmed when it will consider the officer recommendation for an additional capital budget of up to £600,000 in relation to the cinema construction and fit-out costs, Chairman. I have a copy of that because I appreciate Committee Clerk will probably need that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Connett. Before we move to consider that and debate that amendment, Councillor Patch.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to request that all votes on this matter be recorded votes and invite any of the members who have the same opinion to stand.
That is, proposal is carried. Thank you, Councillor Patch.
Seeking advice from the monitoring officer on this. If it's a recorded vote in part 2, which would, I presume, remain a confidential minute, I'd just like clarification that actually people might wish to disclose that, whereas it's confidential if it's part 2. So I'd welcome some advice on that, please.
Mr. Woodhead.
Chair, thank you. Members, the vote will be in part 1. So the debate in part 2 for obvious reasons, and then we'll come back out of part 2, back into part 1 in order for the vote to be taken, which is similar to the reasons why the recommendations, etc., were put forward in part 1.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Haynes. I was going to propose that we move to part 2 for to enable a full and frank discussion, but that we go back to part 1 for the vote to be public. Councillors will have heard the proposed amendment from Councillor Connett, which was in 3 parts, commissioning a report. Has been seconded by Councillor Keeling. Thank you. The first part was to commission a report from the external auditors in relation to commissioning, construction costs and contracting for the proposed new cinema. Part 2, a comprehensive written report for each executive meeting, whether or not on the Future High Street Fund. And the third part of the amendment, pending receipt of the report from the external auditors proposed, the Council now adjourns to a date to be confirmed when it will consider the recommendation for an additional capital budget of up to £600,000. So Councillor Connett is proposing that this meeting is in fact adjourned until that report comes from the auditors, and therefore a full and frank debate and discussion with sufficient information is possible. Councillor Connett.
reserve my opportunity to speak to the motion and amendment later on. I'm quite happy for members to go into part 2 and have a debate. I simply wanted to set out an amendment whereby we await further information, as in adjourn the meeting, rather than vote on the 600,000 today. But I respect that members will have come today with wishing to debate the item, and I think they absolutely should. But I don't think we should necessarily take the vote on the matter today. That's the view, and hence the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. Mr. Managing Director.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate that the leaders brought forward an amendment. We haven't seen the amendment, so therefore we haven't had a chance to look at the impact of that. I don't know. I've just given a copy to the strategic lead for the project, Neil Blaney, to have a look at. Would it be appropriate for an officer to give a comment on that? Because initially I have concerns about the delivery of the project past this, given that, whether we can actually meet the timescale, given that this would delay the project for a number of months, potentially getting Grant Thornton to do that. So we need to give advice. I mean, I don't know, Neil hasn't had a chance to look at it, or Tom, who's working on the project and has been speaking to the future High Streets civil servants about funding and the movement of that date that would give us an absolute need to spend the money by 2024.
Councillor Bullivant.
Thank you, and I appreciate the amendment that's been put forward. My concern is we have a professional team of officers who have worked effectively and managed the finances of this council for many years. Our 151 officer is extremely experienced, has worked on similar projects over many years. And I can't understand why this amendment has suddenly been brought forward now, when presumably the leader has been able to work with officers to put these ideas together. And why is it now that we should suddenly challenge the decision of an officer and a recommendation of the officer, saying that it should go out to an external body to assess whether the officer's recommendation is valid or not? I find that difficult to understand. Thank you.
Councillor Linda Petherick.
Thank you. I'm really sorry to have to say this, but for me, this seems an absolute mess. I've got no clue what I'm supposed to be voting for today. And the fact that something's been brought forward without officers' knowledge is unacceptable, and I just don't see how I can vote on any of all this today, because I just don't know. It's like being in a tumble dryer. You don't know whether you're coming or going. It's one thing 1 minute, it's another. Last meeting we were told it was all going to be withdrawn, then we suddenly get notice to come to an extraordinary meeting to vote for another £600,000 for something that's been withdrawn, but obviously must be coming back again. Then we get here and we're told that there's an amendment to it that the officers know nothing about. That's just disgusting as far as I'm concerned.
Councillor Malone.
Hi, there is an LGO guideline that a vote must be carried out within a timely distance of the debate that preceded it. There's no value at all in debating something today, all the key points of which will have been forgotten by the time these figures come available. I mean, what is the point of that? There's no point at all. I'm all for it. On another matter, I'm all for it because Cineworld is going into administration. By the time this happens, View Cinemas will be there. Scott Cinemas still haven't, as far as I know, have signed a contract. All that's going to happen is that this idea will look even more ridiculous in a couple of months' time.
Councillor Keeling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I support the leader's amendments, and an independent external audit and oversight by the executive will give the public the confidence that the 600,000 is spent well if we agree that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keeling. Councillor Swain.
Thank you, Chair. I note the comments about this being sudden, and I agree with that. But the comment about the vote having to be close to the debate is not relevant because we're going to debate the amendment at this point and we will vote on that immediately. It is sudden, but there's quite a lot of things happening very suddenly. I was surprised reading this report to learn that Scots hadn't been signed up to the whole deal and still aren't, for example. The extra £600 requirement has appeared very suddenly, so I don't think it's fair to criticise the amendment for being sudden. It's responding to the situation that we find ourselves in. Not so long ago, I was in this room being asked by some people to consider an alternative plan for the Alex, and I was advised by experts that there was a £500,000 hole in the budget for that. I took that very seriously and I voted against the proposal, which potentially had significant costs associated with it. But now we seem to be facing, for perfectly valid reasons, but we seem to be facing an equally large hole in this budget, which we may or may not be able to afford, but we have to be responsible with public money. And we must be very careful. For that reason, I wholeheartedly support the amendment to get some proper scrutiny on this about the 600,000, where it's going to come from as well. I am concerned about borrowing. There's a comment that I've heard made that Scots are well placed in the current climate because they don't borrow. They grow their business organically and reinvest. Borrowing is a high-risk strategy, especially at the current times, and we need to be very careful about the money. So I absolutely support the amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Swain. Councillor Patch.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably about going on a year since we were first told how tight the timescale was with this, how we could brook no reconsiderations, no changes, no tweaks of direction, particularly regarding the fate of the Alexandra Theatre. And yet now, when we're at what, sort of 5 to midnight, relatively speaking, on the whole project, and putting into threat these millions of pounds of money that might come into the district, we're being told, just hang on, we won't make a decision now, we'll kick it into the long grass again. What is this? Is this a simple failure of leadership, of vision? Is it incompetence? Or is it a cynical attempt to get to the stage where this council is presented with a fait accompli, we're out of time, this is what we're going to have to do? I think we have to take a decision today. I will be voting against this amendment. I could speculate as to how this has come about today, but I'd probably best not do that. I think this council needs to get a grip, make a decision on this. If we're not to spend this money, we need to give officers the time to pull something out of the wreckage of what's been happening over the last 12 months, certainly, and come up with a viable plan for the future High Streets Fund that will enhance this town and this district.
Councillor Connett, do you wish to respond? I know.
Chairman, thank you very much. I have no difficulty with the officer's advice and recommendation to the council. Obviously it's prepared and it's for members to make their decision. However, having listened to members over an extended period of time, a number of occasions have been expressed about the concern about the information available to councillors to make decisions, about whether there's some external verification of it so that members make the best and most informed decision. We've not had the opportunity to ask Grant Thornton or another external audit provider to have a look at it. I don't believe it will necessarily take an overly long time. I think it could be done very quickly, within weeks, I would have thought, and the council could then reconvene with that knowledge. I also think that during the course of the debate, whether it's in part 1 or part 2 today, issues may arise which might cause councillors to think we would actually like some external validation for that, so that they do make an informed decision. It's not just the up to 600,000 being asked for today, but we're all aware that construction cost inflation is rising and there may be future costs of delivering this project for the council, and it is well that the council is aware of that or the potential of it now, rather than having to come back in some later point because it's asked for more money because of construction inflation. The amendment today was to provide 3 things. The first is the external overview to support the officer's recommendation. The second was to provide a monthly written report on progress of Future High Street Fund, something that we've not had. So I'm interested that those councillors who've been calling for more information now say they don't want it. And then thirdly, to adjourn the meeting to enable that information to be provided from the external auditor, and then reconvene and discuss and decide with the full information or the endorsement of the officer information available to them. If members don't wish to support the amendment, that's fine, that's their right and prerogative. But they have the opportunity to do now the one thing they've said they've always wanted, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connick. Councillor Dawes, I think your hand was next.
Hi, thanks. And I, funnily enough, actually welcome anything that puts the brakes on this spend, because I don't think the council is in a position to make a sensible and well-judged view, because the current situation is indeed so fluid. There's been talk about the status of Scott Cinemas as a trading entity. I don't think the financial director of Scott Cinemas can even say with any certainty what the status of their organisation is. Every single venue operator of any scale in the country is lobbying the government to have their energy bills capped. They've gone up by, some of them by 600%. So what we've seen with Cineworld, who clearly saw the writing on the wall and have taken the best advice, gone into administration, we will be seeing an awful lot of that in the next 6 to 12 months. Whatever happens, even if the energy price is capped as it is now, which is already eye-wateringly high increases. So there is no certainty at all. The frustration that I would share, that Councillor Pedrick put forward, is that it's just the surprise of this, because of course we've come back from an August break, and we've had this meeting put forward, and then at the very last minute another screeching U-turn. Surely the writing was on the wall when this meeting was actually thought of, maybe a couple of weeks ago. So it's very frustrating to have spent most of my time yesterday taking legal advice on the Localism Act, then debating that here at this morning, and then to be told actually there is no debate on spending the £600,000 because we've decided we want to get somebody else to look at it. I mean, we could have told you that months and months ago. Thank you.
Councillor Malone.
Thank you. If I could just throw another pair of pants into Councillor Petherick's washing machine. I would actually support this amendment with an amendment to this amendment, because by all means talk to the council's bean counters about the money, but please get some consultation on the state of cinema today, because VU has issued a profits warning. Cineworld's going into administration. There is no contract with the small firm of Scots, and their whole business plan seems to be to say, I know we're only quarter-filling houses now, but if we had 4 screens, we'd fill the whole thing. That is not a business plan. Nobody has survived on that kind of business plan. You are looking at a huge Tupperware box of a building with nothing going on in it, and you are going to look extremely stupid. So please, for your own sake, get some consultation on where cinema is and where, you know, the nighttime economy is, and how much sense this really makes. Please just do that.
Is that a formal amendment to the amendment, Councillor Malone? Seconded by Councillor Patch. Councillor Patch.
If I may, Chair, I'd like to table an amendment to the amendment to the amendment.
Councillor Patch.
Advise me as to the logistics of this, whether it's indeed possible, but perhaps you'd hear my proposal first.
I would like to propose a vote of no confidence in the leader and the executive of this council for having brought us to this situation now.
I don't.
Will anybody second that?
Councillor Patch, I don't think that's an amendment. It is not accepted as an amendment. It's a completely new motion. Sorry, Councillor Morgan, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Is it on? I find myself in part agreement with both Councillor Dawes and Councillor Petherick, but I also support this amendment by Councillor Connett because it does effectively put a pause on us spending more taxpayers' money. A rather large amount of taxpayers' money, £600,000. And, you know, when the Future High Street Fund was envisaged 4 or 5 years ago, I'm guessing they didn't envisage a future like this. None of us did. And, you know, it's scary for a lot of us. And I would quite gain a lot of reassurance from an external partner, an external group with a dispassionate view on this to give us their opinion before we go ahead any further. I think it's a really pragmatic thing to do. And you know, it will give my committee as audit scrutiny a fair bit of work to do, but I would relish that before we actually put our hands in our pockets and spend any more on this. And I would suggest maybe not Grant Thornton, but the South West Audit Partnership, who will have some familiarisation with the South West and the economy of the South West. But yes, I support this amendment very much so, because I think we need to put a pause on this, take a step back, take someone's dispassionate view on what is a very passionate topic for a lot of people.
Thank you, Councillor Morden. In a moment, I'm going to ask Officer Blaney to comment on the original amendment put forward by Councillor Connett, but there is a second amendment, and I'm going to ask Councillor Malone, could you clarify precisely what your amendment to the amendment is, please, because we will need to vote on that.
Thank you. To secure some consultation in partnership with the consulting with the accountants, to secure some consultation on the state of cinema in the present day and the nighttime economy of South Devon.
Are members clear as to what that amendment is? Yes? Thank you.
And thus to make a clearer view on the viability of opening a brand new full-screen cinema.
Thank you, Councillor Malone. Did you have a comment, Councillor Connett? Councillor Connett.
I thank Councillor Malone for that greater clarity in what he's proposing. I think actually the Managing Director and our officers have been in touch with Montague Evans, independently advising the Council on the cinema matter. Perhaps when we move into part 2, they may be able to explain the work that's been undertaken in that, and that may result in Councillor Malone being satisfied, or he may wish to pursue his further amendment. But I do know that officers have been seeking that external advice and guidance, but I think that is a matter for part 2 when we eventually get there, Chairman. Thank you.
Why can't the public know about the viability of this project?
Councillor Patch. Sorry, can I answer that?
Why cannot the public know about the potential viability of this project? Why must this be hidden in part 2?
I don't think that's the case. Managing Director.
Well, I wasn't commenting on that part, Chair, but in terms of, if I could come back to the audit element, as Councillor Morgan said, but audit scrutiny on the 30th, I believe, agreed the audit plan, the internal elements of that included, and we can change that, quite happy to change that, but it included the review of the delivery of major projects, so that's in line with what you're asking, but we can focus that quite quickly on there. The review of the risk management processes of the Council and the governance as well. So there was a contained within the audit scrutiny in the audit plan for the next 12 months, so that should be in line with what you're asking for in terms of Councillor Morgan and the committee, and whether you want to get that to go out, that will be something we will have to kind of come back to you and just talk to you about how that works. So I don't think that's inconsistent with what members are asking. In terms of, we would have to just take advice on that, because obviously there's some issues potentially around the commercial sensitivity of some of the information, but I'd have to take a view.
Thank you, Mr. Shears. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I think from my perspective, I think Councillor Connett has to be commended on his sudden desire for transparency. late in the day, admittedly, in this respect. I have certain concerns. Some of them mirror comments that have already been made. Where are we finding the money from? As a former member of the exec, I had concerns that we were trying to find £1.2 million worth of savings one year and then £2.4 million worth of savings the following year. And yet we've had to find additional funding for Ford House, and now we're being asked for additional funding for the cinema project. So from my perspective, you know, trying to establish where that money is coming from in detail for councillors to make that decision. And I know Councillor Bullivan's shaking his head, but we were trying to find savings. We are being asked for extra money. There's potential risk here for the council that we end up with a cinema building which is unoccupied for a great deal of time. So while it might be a £7.5 million asset for £2.5 million, if it's sitting empty doing nothing, it's not attracting visitors, it's not regenerating the high street, it's just being a very large building in the middle of Newton Abbot. And that's fair. I mean, you know, I'm not looking at it from the terms of whether it's right or wrong, but I'm just looking at the risks here as opposed to the element. But we should have had reports. We had a meeting in May, and the leader made an announcement that the review would happen over the next few months, and we haven't had that review. The managing director said that there wasn't time, but now we're being asked for a further £600,000 towards this project. There could be other exigencies that involve more money in future. So we're talking about up to £600,000 now, but there could be increased costs, as Councillor Connett has already pointed out. Now, my big problem with this is there's a risk that this freewheels and spirals out of control, and that we end up with a much heavier investment in this process. When Councillor Connett made that announcement in May, I'm assuming that he'd already spoken to officers about the potential risk. Has any attempt been made to review the actual design of the cinema and whether or not that could be cheapened? So make it a 3-screen cinema or a 2-screen cinema, which is either doubling or trebling what we have currently at the Alexandra, and bearing in mind the attendance figures for that single screen are not all that great. We know that. We've got the evidence of that. So from the perspective of the way that the contract is being delivered, are we looking at enough options, and have we reviewed it well enough before coming and asking for this £600,000? Because there are, you know, I'm not saying that we shouldn't regenerate, because Newton Abbot needs the money. It needs that investment. It needs that regeneration. But is this the right step? And if we're going to delay it and delay it and delay it until it becomes a point of we must make a decision right away, and we can't really even debate it at that point, then we might as well spend the next 4 weeks looking at intensive review of what we actually want to deliver.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. I think some of what you've been talking about now is actually part of the debate of the recommendation that's before us. And we are at the moment considering 2 amendments. Can I ask Sarah, did you...
Can we ask the officer's comment, please?
Oh, the officer...
Can you just check with Councillor Malone whether he's intending to add that as a fourth paragraph or a standalone amendment?
Sorry.
Councillor Malone, for your amendment to the amendment, were you including first of all, the 3 amendments that Councillor Connett had put forward, plus your one regarding the consultation for the viability?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Officer Neil Blaney to comment, please, if that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my comments on the amendment is that we were just seeking. Obviously, it's just come to us, so we've not had time to really reflect too much on it. But I've noted a couple of the comments about timescale, and that's the one that jumps out to me straight away. In that we are up against it. I mean, the timescale for delivery of the project was set out in April last year when members signed off the project as a whole. Within that document, within those reports, were the stages and steps required to deliver all of the future High Street Fund projects and draw down the government funding by March 2024. So there's been a series of activities and actions all along that we've been implementing, and at different stages. Authorisation is required for business cases or for planning permission and for everything else. And we are at or past the critical point at which there's no more slack in our timeline, really, to do all the work needed to develop the plans for planning applications, and to make sure that the construction programme as set out in the timeline can be met. Some of this work needs to start now. We've had to pause quite a few elements of the work in preparation for where the cinema is going to go. There's negotiations with tenants, there's utilities we need to divert, and that's all being put on hold because there's obviously a number of issues that have arisen, and the notice of motion that was brought up in July this year. So an additional month, 2 months, means that it's highly unlikely we'll be able to meet the timescale that we've had approval for, and then that puts the funding at risk. So the conversations we've had with the Future High Street Fund team about our timescales is the deadline's the deadline, and the expectation is we'll work towards delivering that. And we are still working on the impacts from the notice of motion, and we've got a report to executive next week regarding that. So in considering this discussion today for the members, clearly you'll decide what you feel is the most appropriate course of action, but any additional delays to this project make it harder and harder for us to meet the timescales as set out, which means that the government funding element of the project, we do not have certainty that the Future High Street Fund team, when they come to review this year's spend, which will be in December this year, and then they allocate next year's spend, if they've got any concerns about the ability to deliver, they may withhold or withdraw the funding. So that's something we've got to consider of how we manage that, and clearly we'll, if the decision today is to accept the amendment, we'll need to go away and look at that. My initial view, though, is that it puts us further and further behind the timescale.
Thank you, Officer Blaney. Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a few comments, I suppose, on the original amendment. I just wanted to remind everybody on something that perhaps we can all agree on, and that is that Newton Abbot Town Centre does need investment. The do-nothing option for Newton Abbot long-term is one of failure for the town and our district. We need it to shift from traditional retail to more of a predominantly leisure destination, but also with revived markets. So I'm hoping that's something we can at least all agree on. And we need to remember too that the Future High Street Fund projects began with a community vision made several years ago. That was the right vision, in my opinion, and many others. But these projects have had to survive a pandemic and are now faced with probably the worst economic situation for decades, if not more. And all of that against a background of a climate emergency, which hasn't been mentioned yet, I don't think. So as the detail of the projects have emerged, people have had legitimate questions about design, how the projects link together, the effect on each other. My concerns about carbon reduction and the quality of the build are in there as well. But still, the do-nothing option is not a sensible option. What we've got to do first is try our damnedest to get these projects right. And that is what we have been trying to do. And other councils have been suffering this exact same problem that are dealing with Future High Street Fund projects or any other government-funded projects. And what is sad in that context is that the government seems to steadfastly be sticking to its line and won't recognise the issues being experienced by us and other councils who are trying to deliver regeneration projects in our towns, and they just won't help us with any extra money in spite of totally unprecedented inflationary pressures. So perhaps we ought to be spending some of our time pressurising the government to contribute more and pushing for extended delivery deadlines. It's interesting, I note that Devon County Council possibly have slightly different language around deadlines on government grants and seem to imply that they can shift those a bit. So I'd like to see us trying that.
But, we're being held hostage here to government funding criteria, with them showing no flex whatsoever, but us suffering all the angst in our council chambers around the country. But it is true, sort of against this background, what concerns me is what others have mentioned, that this won't be the last time we're asked for more money. So the cinema's not the only project. You've got the market hall. It could be that we're asked to contribute more money there. Inflation isn't going to go away anytime soon. So, at some point in any project, I'm not an expert in project delivery, but I have had some training in it. There come points where you have to review where you are. And this is one of those points where, the level of nervousness and risk around this does need reassessing. We need to assess whether we are on the right track and whether the risks just are too great to proceed. And I would be sadder than most of us here about, us having to drop this set of projects altogether. It's been me that said we ought to be brave and bold like other towns, and I've reflected on seeing the success they've had from being brave and bold, but equally there's a thin line then to being foolish. We're in very, very difficult situation, and I think now is the right time to sort of step back, reassess, and that's why I support the original amendment. I don't see any problem in us seeking advice on the future of cinema. I mean, as Phil Shears has said, I believe we have sought advice on the future of cinemas, but if someone else wants to engage someone else to look at the future of cinemas, that's fine by me as well. We need to be looking at the entire set of information and background to the giving of more money to this project and potentially future asks for money as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor Malone.
Yeah, just to say something that I don't think can be said enough, but seemingly doesn't seem to matter in this debate. Nobody goes to the cinema anymore. Yeah, they don't. They just don't bloody go. You go to Scott Cinema on the opening day of a new release and see how much space you've got around you.
Sorry, Councillor Malone, there's a point. Just a moment.
They make their money in one way, and that is selling sugary snacks on the way in. That's where they make all the money.
Councillor Malone.
I'm fine with that.
Councillor Malone, just a moment, please. There is a point of order from Councillor Bullivant.
Thank you. Firstly, I go to cinema, but secondly, can we focus on the question that's in front of us and not please go off onto flights of fancy? Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I'm not allowed to interrupt other people when they're making their points just by saying I'd like to make a point in the middle of that. So why is Councillor Bullivant afforded that luxury, please? If I can just finish my point.
Please do, Councillor Malone, but please finish it quickly.
They're both going down the plug hole. We've got Scots, which can't even quarter fill a house on the first day of a new release on a bank holiday. This is delusional. Delay it, discuss it, do whatever you like, but this is bonkers. You're building a cathedral in the desert, and it's going to be a monument to how stupid this council is. So can we just bear that in mind? Thank you.
It will be borne in mind, Councillor Malone. Councillor Petherick.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions, if I may, please, and I'll hang on to the mic for the second one, if I may. I've heard different figures mentioned by Councillor McGregor and also Councillor Jeffries as to the cost of this cinema. What's it going to cost less than 600,000, please?
I think, Councillor Petherick, that's probably for the Part 2 debate when we get into the details. Can we put that on hold, please?
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Connett.
I was just going to simply move that we go to part 2 so we can have the discussion on all the matters.
It has been proposed that we move into Part 2, where it is recommended that under Section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act of 72, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 financial matters of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. I propose that we move now into Part 2. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Keeling. Can we have a vote with show of hands, please? Those in favour of moving into Part 2. Those against? And any abstentions? Thank you, it is carried. So we will now move into part 2, which involves various bits of technical adjustment, and ask the members of the public, please, to adjourn themselves from the venue. I just remind members of the public that we will be going back into part 1 for the vote, and you will be invited to come back and join us.
Don't let members start raising.
Told you we should watch lunch.
No. If they give me a tap if you think it is. Councillors and members of the public and officers, thanks for coming back. We will be going to the vote shortly on Councillor Malone's amendment to Councillor Connett's amendment. But before that, I'm going to ask Officer Blaney just to summarise from the officer's point of view what the implications of the decision that we're about to vote on might be. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So, just to summarise where we are, the purpose of the recommendation today is to secure additional funding that will enable Scott Cinemas to sign the lease with us and to allow the council to progress the cinema project. Without Scott being legally committed, we cannot move forward with this part of the project. So the decision today is to refuse, then clearly the project ends. If the decision today is to defer, then this presents a significant risk to the delivery timescale. So the necessary actions required to move the project forward will have to be paused. We can't commit resource and cost when there's uncertainty and no authorisation to move forward. So officers will need to delay and pause work that is currently planned in these next few weeks and months to move the project forward to the necessary timescales. And that then, as discussed earlier, will mean that we're unlikely to meet the timescales required to draw down the grant funding. Within the Part 2 report, we set out the safeguards that are in place to protect the council's position and public money. There's a condition as well that allows us to review costs and walk away if the costs are too high. And if I turn to the amendment put forward by Councillor Connaught, in Amendment 1, the actions set out, being asked to refer to external auditors, are already inbuilt into our processes. We are able to provide the executive with updates on costs and progresses in line with Amendment 2. This has already been done on a monthly basis with the executive member, so it won't be an issue to move that into a more formal report. But turning to obviously item number 3 about pausing, there is significant risk to the project by adding any further delays into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Blaney. Councillor Jeffries. Sorry, we had Councillor McGregor, then Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Neil, for the explanation. I also wanted to bring up a point, having worked with government funding, central government funding before. Is it fair, perhaps the portfolio holder can confirm this, is it fair to say that if we fail to deliver this project at all, then that impacts on our ability to bid for funding in future, because we'll be scored against our performance on delivering projects that we either fail to deliver or have delays on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. It was just going to be my exact point. As a former funding officer, I just wanted to highlight that projects that potentially don't meet the criteria or at the end don't complete, you're much more likely to look less favourably on any projects that come forward in the future based on their deliverability. So it's very important that we think about that or have that in our minds when we're thinking about how the government may look at our future capital projects in terms of how we deliver on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Foden.
Thank you. Thank you. Since the Future High Street Fund was set up by the government some years ago, several years ago, the economic situation of Teignbridge and the whole country has hugely changed, and the government knows this. So since this council applied for future high street funding some years ago, and the amendment, Councillor Connett's amendments, which I do support, can we use this opportunity to ask the government, to call on the government, whether we can revise the projects, including the proposed cinema, in which the funds are to be spent, we are not the only local authority that is having problems implementing the Future High Street funds and their projects. So in order that we can still benefit Newton Abbot and Teignbridge with the 5 million funding put forward by the Future High Street funding, can we approach the government to review the Future High Street Fund and the way that the funding has to be spent? Because things have hugely changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Feldwin. Managing Director.
I think I can only reiterate that we've already approached Future High Streets. We've asked them, there is no certainty, there may be a little bit of stretch over a month, but there is no certainty that the civil servant has said, yeah, the deadline is a deadline, but then who knows where with the fluid government we've got and the fact that we haven't had ministers or civil servants there being able to answer questions. They've been engaged in other projects. We've also lobbied the MP for this. So Neil had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with our MP to ask her to take action, and we chased that up as well, trying to ask for exactly that. So far we've been told that there is no movement, there is no extra money, but to reiterate what I said earlier, the officers that have worked, and we're trying to put together the change request to retain the wall and to do a renovation of the market and to build the cinema as it's proposed to you today with the 4 screens, was looked upon favourably by the civil servant, although he or she couldn't commit to it until they saw the change request and, as Neil said, the viability of what is their model. So we don't prepare a business model as you or I would normally consider it. There is a whole host of unfortunate ways in which the government like you to go through the calculations, because obviously public spending is slightly different to borrowing the money to your bank and then perhaps putting either your house or your business at risk on that because of the borrowing you have. So there's a very different criteria for the way in which they assess the return. So I think hopefully you should have comfort that, one, we've already asked that, we will continue to lobby on that basis as well, because there is no sense in us not doing that. But the revised proposals, if we exclude the Alexandra, means that the project looks more affordable because it reduces the construction costs of the whole project, the totality of it, potentially meaning that we could cope without having to ask for more money, and the 9.2 million will be as we initially envisaged, but obviously moving bits of that budget around within the scope of the projects, within the overall project. So minor elements may have some movement from one to another, but we think we could deliver a revised market hall proposal, the cinema and the high street improvements as well. But obviously, your decision today has a significant impact on that, and as officers are set out, there is a risk that we don't know what will happen with the decision. So we aren't able to give you exact advice on this. There is a level of risks that you need to assess yourselves and make that brave decision one way or the other what you want from it.
Thank you, Mr. Shears. I have Councillor Connett and Councillor Colcroft. Councillor Connett.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to Councillor Foden, I'm very happy to write a letter to the new Prime Minister with the Managing Director, just pointing out the pressure not just for Teignbridge but other future High Street Fund councils because of the exceptional rise in construction cost inflation. I think that may be a point that could be well made to government. In terms of Councillor Malone's amendment, I'm quite happy to accept that as part of the amendment I've made and to carry that forward. And just in terms of the points that Officer Neil Malone made, clearly the Council has been progressing somewhat at risk, having not had the contract signed for the cinema element, and we've done that and carried on quite as we should. The amendment before council that I made at the start of the meeting is simply for some external reassurance, which will help validate the members' decision. And I don't see that provides any greater risk, given that we have a projected planning date for the cinema towards the end of the year, and I think that work could be done very, very quickly, and for the council to make a robust and informed decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Connett. Councillor Colcroft.
Time seems to be of the essence here. and we're dependent on Scots forming a legal agreement with the council to take over this cinema project. Now, how long have they got to come back with telling us or forming this legal agreement? I mean, does it just go on and on? Because time is of the essence. So is there a deadline waiting for Scots to come back one way or another, or whether they're going to agree to take over this project?
Can I ask Officer Phillips to respond to that question, please?
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of the public nature of this. We have all terms agreed, and it's both parties' intention to proceed to exchange of contracts by the end of this month, should we have approval here today.
Thank you, Officer Phillips. Right, I think that brings us to the point now where we have to consider to vote on Councillor Malone's amendment. I'll ask the head of
Sorry, do I not get to speak to the amendment before?
Can you just, Chair?
I was going to ask the head of Democratic Services to read it out and then ask you for any comment.
But before that, Chair, can you address with Councillor Malone and Councillor Connor what on number 3 it says adjourned to a date to be confirmed? That, with respect, doesn't really mean anything. When and who confirms?
The Councillor Connett and Councillor Malone, the monitoring officer asking in part 3 of yours, now adjourns to a date to be confirmed. What does that mean?
Chairman, with the most expediency, one assumes that if Council support the amendment, they commission the work from the external auditors. As soon as that report has been presented, the Council could reassemble. Of course, I can't give that date because I don't know how quickly that would be possible to do, but I imagine that our officers and our external auditors would work with great speed to ensure that the decision, that the information and report is available to councillors quickly. And so, as is normal, my anticipation is that the new date for a reconvened council meeting will be set by you in consultation with relevant officers, Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Malone.
Just a point of order. If the leader has said that he's
the leader said that he's happy to incorporate my my amendment into the other 3 he's got. If that's the case, can we not just vote on that as a set without having to debate whether mine is in there or not?
Yes, that's what we propose to do, but okay. I was going to ask the head of Democratic Services to read out your amendment, because councillors, including myself, may have forgotten precisely what it was. We've seen Councillor Connett's on paper, and then we will vote on it as a job lot.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Sarah, could you read out the Councillor Malone's amendment?
Yes, Councillor Malone, please do comment if I haven't got the wording correct. The council resolves to engage consultants specialised in cinemas and the nighttime economy in order to establish how viable a new 4-screen cinema is.
Do you have any further comment, Councillor Malone?
Sorry?
Yes, there was something about the nighttime sector in the southwest as a whole, I think.
Nighttime economy in the southwest as a whole.
Sure, yes, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, sorry, that was seconded by Councillor Patch, that amendment, wasn't it? And Councillor Connick, and your seconder accepts it, which was Councillor Keeling. Thank you. Sorry.
So we are voting on what is effectively now one amendment. All those in favour?
Chair,
it's a recorded vote.
A roll call was asked for.
Sorry,
so
I beg your pardon. I had forgotten.
Trish will read out the names, and hopefully members are all confident what they're voting for. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Austin.
Councillor Bradford? Councillor Bullivant?
Against.
Councillor Colclough? Councillor Connett?
For.
Councillor David Cox? Councillor Hugh Cox? Councillor Evans? Councillor Foden? Councillor Gribble?
Abstain.
Councillor Haynes?
For.
Councillor Hayes?
For.
Councillor Hocking?
For.
Councillor Gordon Hook?
For.
Councillor Jackie Hook?
For.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Abstain.
Councillor Jeffries? Councillor Keeling?
For.
Councillor Kurzweil?
Abstain.
Councillor McGregor?
Against.
Councillor Morgan?
For.
Councillor Malone?
For.
Councillor Nutley?
For.
Councillor Parker?
For.
Councillor Patch?
Against.
Councillor John Petherick?
Abstain.
Councillor Linda Petherick?
Abstain.
Councillor Purser?
For.
Councillor Rollison?
For.
Councillor Swain?
For.
Councillor Taylor?
For.
Councillor Thorne?
Abstain.
Councillor Clarence?
Abstain.
And yourself, Chair.
For.
Thank you.
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that means that the recommendation put forward by Executive Member for Economy and Jobs to move is withdrawn in the light of the passing of the amendment. I think that brings us to the end of this morning's business, and I declare the meeting adjourned.